Hello, I thought I would make a, well, I was going to say quick video, but I don't think it will be quick. This will be part one of the process I use to make dip pens. If there's any of you who have a home shop and would like to make some nice looking pens, feel free to use these ideas. First thing I do is I'm selecting my woods that I'm going to be using for the pen. I typically make mine in two pieces. Just one moment, I left something over on the lathe. Just a moment. Make mine out of two pieces, and that is a grip section, and then of course the shaft of the pen. And let's talk about the grip section first. The grip section I make out of fairly small pieces of wood because usually I'm making my pens out of reclaimed wood, something from maybe a fire pit or we cut down a tree, and so I'm usually not working with really large pieces of wood, maybe something like this, and so I'll use one piece of this here for sections and then the rest for the shaft. If you're using commercial wood, then you can do it any way you want, of course, but we'll go over to the lathe in a minute. You'll see how we get to the next step. But grip section, I usually like to use something with a lot of character or color for the grip section. Now, a few ways you can accomplish that. Now, I should say, as opposed to something that's more straight-grained, like this piece here, or this piece of black walnut that's fairly straight-grained, it's pretty, but there's no texture to the wood. And that's fine. I do make pens out of that. And honestly, a pen with a dark grip section can be nice because, especially for a beginner, if they dip too deep, they get ink on the section. But something with a little more character, like maybe this here, or cutting the wood at a different angle, like this piece of cherry. You can see here the grain is running diagonally as opposed to maybe straight, like maybe this piece here, you've got more straight grain. But this is a piece of apple, and as you can see, it was a fairly small piece of apple, a limb maybe, because this here is your heartwood and here's your sapwood, and the center of this limb would have been right there. So this was only about that big to begin with. But when you're making small stuff, you can use pieces like this, and this will make a really pretty grip section because it'll be this pinkish color on one side and white on another. Sometimes color woods like this, where you've got the transition here from heart to sapwood, you can see how that's been cut. You also can use woods you don't find often, like maybe lilac. Here, what I would do for this piece, there's a lot of waste, but it's really the only way to get a usable piece out of it, is I would center the lathe on the heart here and here, and essentially turn all this out, so I'm left with just one narrow piece. But that way that heart will run fairly straight through the pen as opposed to coming in and out of the grain along the way, because it is fairly narrow and that is going to be fairly straight. But this is lilac, and I've not counted the rings, but this is probably a 20-year-old piece of wood, and it's really, really hard, which makes it a nice wood. Now, the way I prepare this is by billeting it. I've got a video on that, so I'm not going to show you, but cutting and then billeting the wood into these small pieces allows it to dry quicker, and it just makes it more convenient for me to use, though you certainly could cut a piece later. Now, the shaft of the pen I make out of a plainer piece of wood and straight grained. That's because they get really, really thin on the lathe, and the highly figured wood tends to break a little more often. This is a 7-inch piece, and when I'm done, the grip section will be a little over 1.5 inches. It's about 1.6 inches when all is said and done. Sorry, my finger's covering the measurement there. But I prefer to make these longer, as you'll see here in just a moment when we go over to the lathe. So that's kind of it about the selection of wood. Character in the grip section, strength and straight grain on the shaft will make you more successful at the turning. Right, so step 2 after selecting the wood is I'm going to mark center. This is a little square that allows you to do that easily. You place the wood like this, but on the back side, and you scribe a line here and here, flip it over, and here and here. And this works on both circles and squares, but it gives you a center mark in your wood. And now I'm just going to center punch that, which just puts a little hole. Right like that. Now, I found the easiest way to do this is to just let the lathe do the work for you. This is just a small hobby lathe. I'm going to put the center mark here into the center on the spindle there, and I'm going to move this forward and lock that down, and I'm going to kind of tighten this in a little bit. Now, as I start turning this, it's going to just spin freely here, but that's okay. I'm going to let it do that. And I'm going to spin this in. It's kind of, what it's doing now is it's cutting in until I hear that, and I let go and just tighten it up, and it'll take a minute or two for this to bite down all the way. Now I'm going to just keep doing this. Hope you can hear me over that. Eventually it's going to kind of, it usually catches at some point and starts spinning again. This one may not, but if it does, then you just tighten it up again and you're now good to go. All I'm really trying to do is get this down to a diameter that'll fit in my other lathe, and I just use this as a cheater. I'm looking for that diameter on that piece. A little thin up there, I'm probably going to regret that. I went way too far. I may only get one piece out of that. Wasn't paying very good attention. Now, this here isn't necessary, but you can, if you'd like, just back this off, flip this around, and you can clean up that other end piece on the back side of that spindle, on this other spindle. Alright, that's it on that. We'll stop here. Alright, so the next step is, now that I've got these blanks for the front done, or the top, the section, I now need to decide how I'm going to cut these guys for the base. And so I'm going to make this here my the section I'm going to keep, and this will be the waist, and the same on this one here. I've got this gap set to slightly more than the piece, because eventually I need to true these ends. So I've made it a bit proud. I'm just going to move these up, and then I'm going to cut these carefully through. I'm going to pause it while I do that because it'll be quite loud. I'll show you what we've got when I'm done. Now I've got those other pieces cut, but I forgot to do this. I also need to get one of these shafts prepared. I'm essentially looking for something like this, which is just a turned piece as long as I need it, which is 7 inches in this case. So I'm going to do that right now with this one, and then I'll turn you back on when I get to the critical part of this. All right, now I need to put a taper on this end. I'm looking for something like this here. And the reason for that will become apparent later, but this eventually will chuck in over here. The question is, what side of the piece do I want that on? And I'm going to put it on this side because there's a knot right here which it doesn't go all the way through, and by the time I get this down thin, it will be gone. But if I put it on the other end, it will be on the fat part of the pen, and I don't think I'll cut it out. So I'm gonna put that little taper here, and this is how I do that. It's really all I need. So this will become apparent later what that's for, but this eventually, as I said, will chuck into here and allow the rest of the pen to be there. Or this chuck here, this will be gone. So we've gone from making this 7-inch square to something round with a taper, and I've gone from this piece here that is at least 1.5 inches or more to these. Now you're going to have some waste. That obviously is no good. This one's fairly narrow. I may not waste my time with that because I messed up on the other lathe. These two pieces here I think will work, as will this one. So I've got 3 of the grip sections and 1 of the shaft. So go ahead and stop this and go to the other machine. All right, now that little wrench that I have tells me the diameter to make these so that it will fit all the way inside this chuck. On this piece, I don't really care about this. I only care about this end. I need to get this end squared off because it's going to become a glue surface and I want it to be good and clean. So I'm going to chuck this here. I'm going to turn on the lathe and I'm going to cut this flat. I won't talk while it's running in case it's hard to hear. This is not the only way to do this. It's how I choose to do it because I have the tools and it, quite frankly, just makes it easier. I also typically at this point would be drilling a hole. In fact, maybe I will do it now. Because when I make these, I don't make them one at a time, and so I want to try to do several processes at once. One of the advantages of doing this on this type of machine is I then can bore that center hole and it will indeed be centered. And you'll see later why this is important. Got that a little hot. All right, got that center hole drilled. Now I'll pause this and come back. Now, this next process, I'm squaring off as a minimum 1 of these sides, but I tend to do both. I'm going to drill this hole, and then I'm also going to drill this hole. Eventually, these come together like this, which gives you 2 colors and a very tight seal or joint. You want to be thinking about the colors you're going to use. So as I said, I generally make a lot of these at once. I know what this is going to look like. It's a very light colored patterned wood, and it's going to look good probably with a black walnut section. So you've got some contrast to it. So I'm going to, in this case, use this black walnut. I'm going to need a large hole on one side and a small hole on the other. And as a minimum, the side with the small hole needs to be square so that it will create a good joint. So I'm going to use this side as my small hole side. Same process, chuck this in and square that off so that I have a square surface. So this is why I made that a tad bit long. So now that I've done that, I've got a perfectly square surface and it's now the right size, and that can glue to here and create a very tight joint. Again, this isn't the only way to do this, but it's the fastest way if you have these tools. We'll pause it now while I change some drill bits. Now what you see here is a 1/4-inch drill bit with the stop set on it. That stop is set so that when this ferrule for your pens is inserted, that the 1/4-inch section, this is a pilot hole, this 1/4-inch bit section, which runs from here to there, is just proud or just long from that ferrule. So I'm just going to turn this on now. I'm going to going to go ahead and square that off since I'm here. And bore my hole. And that's it for that part. We'll pause while I switch. Now I'm drilling the last of those holes here, which is going to allow the screw, which you will see in a moment, to pass all the way through. This needs to be large enough to allow clearance for the screw that you're using. I don't have one here, but we'll use this as an example. We want that to be able to pass freely through that hole, but not this one that we drilled earlier. This one, it needs to bite, but this one, I want it to pass freely. So you can figure out those measurements for whatever you're using. I've flipped this piece around. I'm now on the opposite side that I drilled before. And I'm just going to go through till I feel it pass right on through, as it just did. So I've drilled all the way through that piece now. If you're making a lot of these, as I said earlier, you're better off making them in batches so you're not changing the drill bits all the time. So here's our large hole for the ferrule. It will sit in there, and it's about a 1/16 inch deeper than that is. There's my small hole that will allow the screw to pass through. I've got squared and squared. Those will mate together very nicely, and the holes are centered in both cases. And I've got a large hole here. So let's pause this and I'll show you the final part for step one. So this is my little box of screws. What I use for these is a screw like this. Ideally, if you could find a flat bottom screw as opposed to a tapered one, as those two are, it would be better. But this is what I have, and it works fine because actually at the base of that hole, it's currently tapered because of that pilot bit that I was using. So it works out fine. But this also has a very narrow head, which has been the problem I've had of finding one that's more of a, I think they call it a pan head, where it's flat like that. I need something very narrow to go down in that hole, and these won't do that. So this is the screw that I've settled on for this process. I hope that's focusing well. So this is going to drop in. I've got that much out. We don't want too much because eventually this tapers down pretty thin up here, and you'll see it'll become too weak. But you want enough to hold it, and I found that there works pretty good. That's probably about a 5/8 maybe of thread coming out. I'm going to put glue on both surfaces and screw this thing in, snugging it tight. That's why I want that play right there, so that this will just get snugged down onto that. And I'll show you that right now. Now I'm going to place some glue. This is oozing out of this bottle because of the change in temperature. It's more than I need, honestly. But some glue on both surfaces. You're then going to place your screw in there, having a bit driver that is long enough to go in the hole. And you're just going to start screwing that in. And I'm not too concerned about how this is going just yet, but eventually now you can see they're coming close together and that glue is going to start squeezing out. I don't want this spinning at this point because I don't want it to just spin all that glue out. So I'm going to grip both pieces and cinch that down tight. Not too tight. I don't want to split this piece, but tight enough that it gets snug. Then I'm going to place it into some kind of clamp, and I found that these here work just fine for this purpose. Right, like that. And get it a little bit snug. I just want that really tight where I'm getting a little bit of glue squeeze out, but you don't want it so tight that it's going to bow right there. You don't want to put pressure so much that it begins to do this. So just a little bit snug, and then we're going to allow that to dry. It doesn't need to dry for a really long time because you've got that screw in there, and I'm going to take this out and snug that screw one more time before I'm done. So I don't want it dry, but I do want it to start to set a little bit. I won't show you that last part because it's self-explanatory, but we're going to let this dry, and this will be the end of part 1. We'll come back for part 2 and show how we shape this and then finish it.